When I was a kid, I had a pet lizard named Sweetheart. I didn't exactly set out to get a pet lizard. It's not like it's every little girl's dream pet. Sweetheart was more of a rescue lizard. Sweetheart came into my life after a little boy in the neighborhood hit her so hard with a stick that her leg fell off. And my heart just broke for this lizard. I knew I wanted to do something to help it, so I scooped the lizard up and I ran home with the lizard and I informed my mother that we owned a lizard now. I spent the next 6 months obsessing over how to best rehabilitate this lizard. I started the way any normal, rational 7-year-old girl would do. I gathered all the toothpicks in the house and tried to build her a prosthetic leg. Yeah, that went about as well as you'd expect. And when I realized that wasn't going to work, I decided to focus on how to best help her learn to walk with the 3 legs she did have. So every afternoon, I would take Sweetheart onto the back porch, and we would have walking practice. I built her some obstacle courses. Sometimes I would even go into the backyard and catch more lizards and bring them onto the back porch because I thought she might walk better if she had a little more competition. Yeah, I was a weird kid. And it was admittedly a very weird way for a 7-year-old girl to spend all of her summer afternoons, but to anyone who knew me, it came as very little surprise. Because I've always been someone with a strong sense of empathy. If I see someone or something in pain, I have an overwhelming need to try to do anything I can to stop it. And that's important because empathy is an incredibly important skill. Unfortunately, it's also one that's dying out. According to a recent analysis performed by the University of Michigan of more than 70 studies conducted in the last 3 decades, empathy levels among college students have decreased by a full 40% since 1979. And the steepest of those declines have occurred in the last decade. That is so much more than an empathy deficit, as it's so often called. That is a full-blown empathy crisis, and it has serious implications, not only for education, but for the future of our country as a whole. Now, in order for us to best understand why the empathy crisis represents such a serious problem, we first need to understand exactly what empathy is and how it functions in our brain. Empathy is so much more than just seeing someone in pain and feeling sorry for them. Empathy is actually a complex neurological process that we can see and study thanks to the development of fMRI technology. fMRI technology is basically just a fancy term for brain scan. It's a brain scan that allows us to put you into a machine and see exactly what's happening on the neurological level while you perform a variety of tasks. So I could, for example, put you in an fMRI machine and see what's happening in your brain while you listen to your favorite piece of music, or read a really good book, or watch a scene from a movie. And in terms of empathy studies, I can put you in an fMRI machine and I can see exactly what's happening in your brain while you experience empathy. We do this primarily by studying something known as mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons were first discovered by a scientist named Giacomo Rizzolatti, and he discovered them almost entirely by accident. Rizzolatti was studying the brains of monkeys, and as he was examining their brains, a keeper happened to walk by with a treat. And that's when Rizzolatti noticed something really interesting. He noticed that the motor neurons in the monkey's brain, those are the parts of our brain that control movement and action, they lit up as though the monkeys themselves were holding a treat. So regardless of whether the monkeys were personally holding the treat or simply watching someone hold the treat, the reactions in their brain were identical. And that's why Rizzolatti named these neurons that behave in this way mirror neurons, because they are quite literally taking the other person's point of view. And thanks to the development of fMRI technology, we now know that these exact same neurons exist in the human brain as well, which means that if I were to show you a picture of someone holding a hammer, your brain will light up as though you personally are holding a hammer. And in the human brain, these neurons actually exist in something called the somatosensory cortex as well. And that's the part of our brain that deals with the sensation of touch. So if I show you an image of 2 people holding hands, your brain will behave as though you personally are holding hands with somebody else. But what's even more interesting is that according to a study out of the University of Birmingham, many human beings are actually capable of literally feeling another person's pain. And not just their emotional pain either, but actually some degree of the physical pain as well. Which means that if I show you a video of someone hitting their thumb with a hammer, your brain will behave as though you have been injured as well. And that is important, because pain is an incredibly powerful motivator. If I can quite literally feel your pain, I am going to be so much more motivated to try to end it. And that's why developing empathy is absolutely essential if we want to raise and educate the next generation of change makers and problem solvers. Empathy is also a key component to successful communication because it increases our understanding and it decreases conflict. For business professionals, empathy improves contract negotiations. In teachers, it decreases behavioral issues in the classroom and it improves the student-teacher dynamic. Medical professionals who have a high degree of empathy have lower rates of burnout, fewer malpractice suits, and better interactions with their patients. And those patients have better outcomes and better compliance as a result. So regardless of who or what we want our children and our students to grow up to be, if we want them to be successful, we first must teach them to be empathetic. And if their future success doesn't serve as reason enough, if a desire to mold the next generation of students into change makers and innovators and world savers, if that doesn't serve as motivation enough for us to address the empathy crisis in our country right now, perhaps the discovery of the empathy pathway will. According to a study conducted by the University of Valencia, the part of our brains that regulate empathy are the same parts of our brain that regulate aggression, which means that there's a very interesting relationship between empathy and violence. As we stimulate the neural circuits in one area, the neural circuits in the other area weaken. So as our capacity for empathy increases, our capacity for violence literally decreases. To paraphrase an old Cherokee proverb, there's a war going on inside each of us, the fight between good and evil, between empathy and violence. The winner will be the one that you feed. So we must feed empathy. If we want to raise a generation of children and students who will do something about the violence in our culture, then we must address the empathy crisis. Fortunately, the problem is that much of what we're doing in education right now not only does absolutely nothing to help with the development of empathy in students, it's actually actively hindering its development. Because of the increased focus on STEM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, much of education today is centered around the development of analytical thinking skills. And please don't get me wrong, analytical thinking is very important. And it's something that, as an educator, I can tell you our students really need a lot of help with. The problem, however, comes that according to a study out of Case Western University, our brains cannot perform empathetic tasks and analytical tasks at the same time. And when we focus too much on analytical thinking, we run the risk of overdeveloping that part of the brain. And when we do that, we see a decrease in empathy and an inability to foresee the human cost of our choices and our actions. So while it's certainly important to help our students develop their analytical thinking skills, we need to be mindful of the dangers that come from too much of a good thing. So, how do we fix it? How do we address the empathy crisis in our country right now? Well, there's certainly no magic wand that we can wave. Study after study suggests that the arts, and subsequently arts education, may be the single greatest weapon we have in the war on the empathy crisis. As a neuropsychologist from Stanford University explains, the arts act as a sort of empathy boot camp because they provide us with a safe place from which to explore the experiences and the emotions of another person whose life may be very different from our own. And this is true across a wide variety of artistic platforms. For example, a recent study out of the UK found that dancers not only have a greater ability to identify another person's emotions just from looking at their physical movements, but they also have a stronger emotional response to the physical representation of another person's feelings. Additionally, when the LA County School District decided to add dance classes into their curriculum, after only 20 sessions, 66% of principals reported observing their students becoming more accepting of one another. And 88% of students said that they had begun treating each other better. Both of these things are markers of increased empathy levels. And we know, too, that music has a similar power. In fact, according to a recent study, even something as small as getting together one time per week for group musical making sessions has the ability to substantially elevate elementary school students' performances on a wide variety of empathy assessing measures. And the same holds true for theater, where we find that students who are active in the theater have much higher degrees of empathy than students who are not. Studies have also shown us that reading fiction or studying fine art also have the ability to elevate our empathy levels. So if we are serious about addressing the empathy crisis in our country, which I think we should be, then it's time to make arts education a priority. It's time for us to write letters and lobby decision makers and donate our time and our talents to ensure that our students are getting STEAM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, not just STEM in the classroom. It's time for us to encourage the children in our lives to read books and play music and make sculptures and dance, because there is an empathy crisis in our classrooms right now, in our country right now. And we need to make arts education a priority right now if we are ever going to have any hope of reaching a positive resolution. Thank you so much.